So everyone, welcome to yet another OpenChain meeting. This is the AI Study Group's workshop, a monthly, up to 2-hour focused discussion. We're going to be looking at a draft guide to AI Bill of Material compliance in the supply chain. Now, before we get started and hand over to our chair, Matthew Crawford, he's co-chair with Dave Marr. I see Dave has joined too. We've got both of our chairs. I'm going to show us the antitrust policy notice. We show this at the beginning of every Linux Foundation meeting. The full antitrust policy is on the Linux Foundation website. And if you're from a member company, you can ask any questions of our counsel, Andrew Updegrove. If you're not from an LF member company and you have questions, please direct them to your counsel. Long story short, we have ground rules so everyone can have a fantastic and productive collaborative discussion. And with that, we should dive right into it. I'll hand over to you, Matthew. You've got some slides to guide the discussion, I believe.
Thanks, Shane. And welcome everyone to this AI working group meeting. We are getting close to the end, I think, of the AI Compliance Bill of Material Guide. During last month's meeting, we kind of all had some homework to go and review this guide. I thank everyone for going in and making edits and reading and reviewing it. My plan today really was to just kind of go through this document again, as we've done in the past, and see if there's any discussion that at some point soon, possibly the June meeting, we can go to the board and say we are close to, I guess, completion, if you will. I will just put the link to the document in the chat, and then I will share my screen. Does anyone else have anything they want to discuss, though, before we do that? Hearing none, I can share my screen. And I do note that the Qualcomm team have gone in and made quite a few edits, which is great, and some anonymous contributors as well. Dave, Brian, Jeff, any one of you want to just say sort of how you thought it was sort of reading all the way through? Is there any points in particular that you want to highlight and discuss?
Hey, Matthew, and then Jeff and Brian. Well, Brian's not on the call yet. Yeah, Brian, you're there. Okay. Please feel free to jump in anytime. We looked at sort of the document in a kind of a macro perspective and did a close comparison to areas of overlap with 42001, knowing that OpenChain and 42001, they're in the same ISO IC infrastructure, and so having overlaps would be something that would require some thinking through. We of course identified several, and there's been already some cross-referencing taking place indirectly, but we added some direct references in various portions to try to demonstrate how certain sections had a strong overlap, and we kind of need to get some input on what we want to do with that overlap. Our tentative thinking at this point is that by using common terminology, it improves the positioning of OpenChain in terms of this AI bill of materials management guide. So if you look at 42001, frankly, in my opinion, it's a pretty heavy lift. And it has a bit of an academic focus. It's a good document, but it's not a great like jumping off point to get started in a sense that there isn't sort of a prioritization as to which pieces are most conducive to an efficient supply chain. And so our cut at this, with various comments sprinkled throughout. I mean, you'll see it under my name, but it was really a co-edited document with Jeff and Brian as well. And if folks aren't aware, Jeff leads the Qualcomm data set practice on AI training, and Brian leads the model aspect on AI model development, both in the context of legal support. So pulling that level of granularity into this document was, I think, a approach that we tried to adopt. And that's why you get to these first edits here. The first edit is a little bit more of a, just kind of a, cleaning up a little bit. I would say it certainly is heavily inspired, but I think that it's simply just say it is inspired and recognize, 5230 as part of this. And I don't think we lose any thing by taking out a few words there. The edit at the bottom of the first paragraph, here, the last sentence of the forward, that's added there so that we can just sort of more explicitly provide context for what I just said. We're using 42001 terminology, in various places, but more so we want to call out examples of 42001 where people can take a deeper dive if they wanted to on certain sections. But if they didn't have access to 42001, they could work with this document intact without having to go to the much larger in-depth version of that as a good, again, jumping off point for a focused effort on supply chain efficiency for this bill of materials. So let me pause there. I talked a lot. I don't know if Brian or Jeff have anything to add, or if other folks have questions.
No, that was a good summary, Dave. I appreciate that.
I have a question. The fact that we're referring to 4201 several times through the document, do you think that limits the impact that this guide could have?
Well, that's the tricky part that we're trying to finesse a little bit here. Because we do have 4201 and because it has a fairly large footprint, it's almost impossible for us to write something here on good supply chain compliance and creation of good bill of materials without having some overlap. If you drew a Venn diagram, there would have to be some piece of it. But there are pieces that that 4201 frankly doesn't consider. And those are the pragmatic aspects of how do you actually do the handoffs and how do you actually provide, the governance of specifically the SBOM aspect of this work. And my theory is that 4201 was driven more by academics thinking about macro safety concerns, which are of course important. But when you're getting down to like, how do I actually run this within the context of a business? I think it's perhaps a little bit less informed by that experience.
Thanks, Dave. Appreciate that.
Yeah. So the question is, how do we actually put something together that actually gives us the result that we need within industry, while being thoughtful about this approach and balancing, those kinds of sort of macro safety questions in this approach. And by using references here, we propose that maybe there's a approach to harmonization. And we're not saying this is the only way to do it. Maybe other people have better ideas. Totally open to that. But maybe we can get into that as we go through this document.
Anyone else got any comments? Shall we go through? So I think you're probably, Dave, your point around adding 42001 is probably in here as well for point 1. Just kind of summarized what you've just said.
Mm-hmm.
And it looks like just some tidying up of the language here.
Yeah, that's maybe Yeah. Jeff or Brian, do you guys want to start with this, or do you want me to, start and you guys can jump in?
I think you've got a good pace going, Dave. That's okay.
Yeah. Okay. So on section 1 policy, so we added a little bit of like context. And if you look at 42001, they have an Annex B that provides you some implementation guidance, and that's really kind of where we're at. There's a couple pieces that are useful from the normative sections of it. And we also want to be careful that we don't sort of like take things like, like lift, like do a whole copy and paste, because that would lead to additional potential copyright questions. But in terms of like the ideas that are articulated in certain sections, such as this Annex B that's focused on implementation, there is some good material there. But we just in the philosophy of OpenChain, we try to distill things down to its core essence. And the things that I think that that we should articulate here are business strategy, so internal communication, but also business strategy, legal requirements, and we phrased it as I missed the, I don't have editing right now, but it should be legal requirements in the relevant jurisdictions, and the level of risk. Thank you, Matthew. And the level of risk appropriate for the use case. So these are kind of a little bit high level concepts, but they're also intended to be, somewhat future proof based on where the laws might evolve and the practice in the AI space might evolve based on sort of social norms as they get developed. But we use the reference to 420 here as an example, okay, and that was intentional. There's certainly the possibility that other ways and normative guidance might come out. Any country, region might have their own approach to this that's independent of IEC. And so those would be materials that ought to be referenced if one were to be operating in that relevant jurisdiction. So let me actually pause there, because that's perhaps in terms of like underlying approach, this is a good example of what we would be proposing, and this kind of thinking is kind of sprinkled throughout this document in various locations. But what we're trying to do here is, this EG is intended to be, for example, right? We're not using IE specifically because we want people to be not limited to the example that we provided, but we do want to call back to the section that might be relevant for those who want to dive more deeply into 42001 compliance. Again, this is a jumping off point and doesn't take one through complete 42001, but we think that it's a thoughtful way to start down this path with one's journey. Again, also focused on the pragmatics, the things that OpenChain I think cares about. So then verification materials, there's another edit there. We just, kind of said a documented policy isn't enough, but we do want to say that the policy should meet the above requirements. So we added that additional language. The second bullet seemed great. And then the rationale, we also added a substantial edit to the last sentence. We basically almost inverted it. Where previously it said all the no requirements are provided, as to what should be included. We actually reframed that as actually you do need to provide requirements, but they can, they can be high level. And then we kept the, other sections may impose requirements. Okay. Any questions on policy Any thoughts? Any ways to make it better, or other ways to make it, take a different approach? Okay, moving on to competence, section 2. Here we actually, there's a different section in Annex B that actually has a bunch of parameters. And there was a bit of cherry picking on this one. We did take, these 5, 6 words, from 42001. I don't think that that's copyright infringing. It's selected based on, sort of concepts that are core to the way that any AI program seems, in our view, needs to have, some consideration. And the only thing that's sort of unique to the way that we angle this is we included supplier management as a component. But if you read this sort of like in context, we frame this as these are baseline functions. And we couldn't think of a scenario where none of these, any one of these 5 factors wouldn't be a consideration within the context of an enterprise supply chain. And so that's why these are there, but there are more. If you wanted to go super robust, if you were, let's say, put yourself in a mindset of, again, my paradigm is that it's an academic that was sort of making out the longer list, you would probably see a lot more. But I think these are the core essence, and then there would be, of course, depending on more expansive use cases, additional factors that one would reasonably want to include. And then the rest of it is unchanged. It's about making sure that that we've got competency across different program participants. So then the verification materials, we also didn't edit. All those seemed suitable. And then when you get to section 3, awareness, we also then provided another example, but this time we went to a normative section of the specification. That's the section that kind of went towards the making sure people are aware of the actual policy. Relevant AI objectives. Our comment there is, do we actually need to keep that? That is, if that would be something that would be outside of 42001, and I think it's a holdover from the OpenChain spec, the first OpenChain spec, and so I don't know that we need it here, but because in the context of everything else, I think that those objectives do get expressed. But I'm also fine to keep it if people feel like it's necessary. Okay. All right. So
I was hoping to do a strike through, Dave.
Okay. Yeah.
But maybe I can just delete it.
I think if you go into edit mode, or suggesting mode, then you are. Yes, it's suggesting mode. If you just
suggesting mode, I see.
Yeah, the second one. And if you try to delete that, it should show that there's a suggestion to delete rather than an actual delete.
There you go.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Thanks.
License obligations.
Yeah. Matthew, is there a way to zoom in a little bit on your screen?
Yeah.
I mean, people can zoom in on their own, but maybe just a little bit.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Is that okay?
Yeah, that's
Does that
good.
work?
I think it does. Oh, actually, then people can't see the edit to the right, the comments to the right. Okay, there we go. Yeah, that works. Okay, license obligations. Okay, we have a comment here from Nick. Nick, are you on? All right, maybe we just read his comment here. Actually, Matt, this is your comment, but
it is, and I think this is from our. I think we can probably remove this. I think we've covered this in the past. So Nick made a comment in January, and we discussed it in the February meeting.
Okay. All right.
I'm going to mark it as
do you remember where we landed on that? You know, in terms of like the increasing of transparency requirements.
I'm not going to be able to. Am I going to be able to get it back up?
Okay. Anyway, I saw that it referenced the California law around
It
transparency.
I can't remember the discussion now that we had a few months ago, but it was around this transparency and the various legislations that are coming out. Do we want to capture something in here that says, we'll be aware of, future transparency regulations?
Yeah, well, the last sentence in section 6, in the first paragraph, captures something of that, right? If a transparency obligation is required, then it must be acted on.
Yes, and I think we put that on there as a result of that.
Okay. What I would suggest is maybe we highlight that and put a placeholder on it, because I think we can maybe tweak that sentence a little bit. But capturing the spirit of what we picked up there.
Okay, we can look into wordsmithing that.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So the next sentence actually might do some of that work. Okay, if you can scroll down a little bit more. Okay. All right. The next sentence was actually intended to, I think, reframe the prior last sentence, because that last sentence, the prior last sentence, used the concept of encryption as a method to resolve personal data questions, and the thinking was that might be a little bit too specific and might not be it might be over-inclusive and under-inclusive in different use cases. So we genericized this concept a little bit and said, instead, if the use case for the training data creates a relevant legal issue, then appropriate risk mitigation measures should be undertaken. And when we abstract it to a higher level like that, it makes it a little bit more future-proof, and it might actually do some of the work of the prior sentence, above, that we've italicized now, might be wanting to do. So that's the rationale, and that's the proposal then, to use it, to use this more generic language. And I'll pause for a second in case anyone feels strongly about encryption as being something that needs to be hard coded. Okay, all right.
So moving to a practical point then, Dave, if there's no objections, I'm wondering whether we wordsmith this and then just bring this sentence up, because it to me it naturally flows on, or alternatively have a separate paragraph on this bit. Oh, I'm just
Oh, you meaning bring it up into the prior paragraph, or replace the language?
No, not replace it. Sorry, this sentence here, where we talked about there's relevant legislation that comes out, you should follow it. I feel that it's kind of linked to this here, and I'm wondering whether we practically just join that sentence once we've wordsmithed it and this sentence.
Yeah, there might be something that we can do there. I think
Okay.
your placeholder language, gives us the opportunity to come back and try to, make this section flow better. Unless you or others want to try to do that right now.
This was half the point of having 2 hours in the workshop. We can do it. How many more sections have we got? 1, 2, 3, 4. Why don't we try and wordsmith it?
Okay.
So are people have access to this? How do we want to do this?
Well, my concern with the prior sentence was just that it seemed a little bit colloquial. And I didn't have an objection to the substance of it.
What do you mean by colloquial here?
Yeah, there isn't really sort of like a precision around the phrasing of it must be acted on. Like it's like if you have a transparency obligation, then you need to take it seriously. It seems very soft and doesn't convey the sense of the boundary conditions, like what have you acted, what is sufficiently acted on. So that feels imprecise to me for how we might want to capture that. And I don't know that as I look at that and look at the next sentence, I don't know that because the next sentence is so general. I don't know that it's not sort of subsumed into the next sentence. If we want to say something more specific to transparency, then we can do that. And I'm not saying that we can't, wordsmith the next sentence either. It's certainly open for editing as well. What about taking the next sentence and saying, if the use case for the training data creates a relevant legal issue in the context of transparency, then appropriate risk measures should be taken. Because that is a fault in the next sentence. It's certainly, it's not incorrect, but it's providing a very large macro point in the context of a transparency section.
Agree. I mean, Dave, you have access to this, yeah? I can try and wordsmith
Okay.
what you say, or you can go.
No,
I
I'll do
mean,
that. Okay,
another option, where a transparency obligation exists, it must be fulfilled or acted on.
So there's some intentionality in this phrasing. Okay. How do I say this right? There are laws out there that say that you need to do certain things in certain scenarios, and in the context of saying that sometimes that you should consider these things, it doesn't mean that you must consider those things. And there's different ways that it frames those kinds of issues. It may even say you must do it, but then the consequence is that if you don't do it, then you must do something else, and that something else maybe is not quite like super serious. So and then so there's call it non-normative types of language oftentimes in the law that is subject to interpretation, and then based on how a organization lands on that issue, then they might do something that is appropriate to that use case and that risk profile that would be considered to be risk mitigation, but not necessarily like call it letter perfect compliance. And so I want to recognize some of that. And so when there is a legal issue, then you should be aware of it. You should understand it. You should get input on it, and you should take appropriate risk mitigation steps around it. Does that make sense?
Do you want to suggest wording? Were you in the document trying to edit?
Yeah, I am. Okay, so this is I'm in the last sentence. So I added just, let me highlight that. Let me just add it because it's not showing up as a suggestion, probably because, oops, did I make that miss? Oh, you know what? I'm messing it up somehow. Okay, there. No, that's not it. I'm trying to highlight a section and my cursor's not cooperating. So what I did is I said, if the use case for the training data creates a relevant legal issue, added language here, in the context of transparency, I should add a comma, then appropriate risk mitigation measures should be undertaken. So that's my proposal. And then also propose that we remove that. Yeah.
What are people's thoughts on this?
So are we intentionally limiting it to legal issues? I don't have an opinion necessarily either way, but is that the approach we want to take?
It's a good catch.
It's a great question. It's what I was thinking. I don't know if it's the right thinking. So let's open this up a little bit. For non-legal issues, you get into questions around the softer issues around responsible AI practices. How much do we pull that in?
Jeff, was your comment mainly around the word legal here?
I was just real time trying to
Yeah.
parse it myself. If I were to read this, understanding, yes, legal in part, in combination, legal issue, legal requirement, whether we take away legal, and maybe that's too broad, to Dave's point, in that we've kind of made an approach, I think, with this document to not be so broad in some of the kind of lower tier requirements. Just reading that, making sure that someone else would read the sentence and go, okay, I understand what legal issue is on its face.
Thinking about this, I would suggest that we go with the MVP approach. The issue I took with 4201, as I mentioned before, is that it's very broad. It's written by, in my perception, an academic view of the AI world, and it does have a ton of responsible AI stuff kind of written throughout, and those are always important. But I think that enterprises who work on AI in the context of this, I think they're going to be considering those aspects already. So I would actually frame it as, I would propose we start with this, and then if we need to expand, then we expand based on other people expressing that as an essential piece of input.
Dave, I wanted to mention that I work in compliance, and for me personally, I think this sentence totally makes sense, but I wouldn't know how to apply it to my work, in the sense that I have to monitor regulations, and I think our department will be the one watching that the company fulfills whatever is writing, either in regulations or in this standard. So any deviation of what is mandatory by a regulation is not my judgment to make. That will be from the legal department. So I understand the flexibility in this standard, but I don't know how that will be applying to my day-to-day job, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes complete sense to me. In that framework, would you feel like you would deal with this question with legal counsel as part of a team, or would they be more of an escalation point, and then the execution would be more on you?
I don't know, Matthew, what do you think?
Yeah. Yeah, it's an interpretation, and it would be down to an organization's legal counsel to advise their business. But for the purposes of this, could we try and be more clear on what we mean here?
Mm-hmm.
So is a legal issue a contractual one? Is it a regulatory one? Could we remove the word legal completely and just have it really vague as issue in the context of transparency? Because then that broadens the scope, that if it's anything to do with transparency, irrespective of it being legal or not, if it's guidelines, if it's goodwill, those sort of things, we would want to try and mitigate it.
I'm open to that edit. Sandra, how would that edit work for you? Let's say if we take the word legal, and we remove that, would that read better for your practice?
Shall we also draw some examples for clarity?
I do like that idea.
Yeah. Let's try that.
And it could
if
be
I-
some of those things that I've just mentioned around a contractual obligation, regulatory obligation, or just general best practice.
I did mention disclosure in this example, because that's one of the top ones. Disclosure.
And Dave, when we finish this, we've had a question in the chat along this lines from Cassandra that we should probably touch on.
Oh, okay, thanks. I didn't see that.
Let's finish this sentence and then we can come to this.
Okay. There might be other examples, but I think this is the big one that people think about. Sandra, are there other examples you think that we could add here, or does that help or not?
I think this is the biggest one. Yes, totally.
Okay.
So Cassandra has mentioned in the chat, what does transparency obligations mean here? I view it from an open source AI perspective, responsible AI as mentioned. And it's a good point because I'm wondering whether we need to be clear on what we're defining here as the transparency obligation. Because I've seen this as a model. The model could be open source or proprietary. If you remember from last year, we said we try and make it this guideline agnostic of how something's distributed, whether an open source model or a proprietary model. And therefore the transparency obligations were regarding, as we've said here, the model's data set. So for example, if some regulation or a contract says that you need to disclose the training data in your model, then you do so. And that's my interpretation of what we're trying to achieve here. But Cassandra, I'm wondering whether you are interpreting it in a slightly different way. So the follow-up point, could you consider referencing an AI framework as a reference point, perhaps? Does that come back to the framework of ISO 27001?
This is Casey. I'm Cassandra Casey. I'm talking about like NIST framework, those types of frameworks.
And am I missing your point about the transparency obligation? Are you interpreting this in a different way of why, the NIST framework, does it state that we should be transparent in other ways?
No, when I first read this, the first thing that came to mind are the obligations around what meets the open source AI definition. So
Okay.
but I know that it's broader than that.
Cassandra, are you saying that we should probably, pick one, or are you saying that we should be biasing towards the OSI approach to AI?
Definitely neither. So maybe just as examples, you can reference a couple of frameworks that people who are reading this could interpret on their own?
Oh, as part of the examples and the context.
Yeah.
What do you think about referencing 42001 here?
I think it's good. And I'm going to search for a couple of things here myself offline.
Okay. All right. I'm going to suggest then, let me, if I put a placeholder here. Okay. Maybe if we just have a placeholder for that comment and then come back to it. Because I don't have 42001 in front of me right now. And maybe there's other items that are worth referencing. Promoting.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I just put that in the chat. So just as part of a typical AI governance framework, that just might help people point to transparency.
Yeah. Okay. That sounds good. Is that something that Cassandra, you might feel comfortable editing either online or offline? And then
yeah, absolutely.
Something?
I was going to say, if I could, I'll take the opportunity offline to read through the entire document, and I'll definitely make some suggestions.
Okay. All right, great.
Perfect. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, and then I guess moving on, verification materials. Verification materials, document procedure to review and document the transparency obligation. Yep. No edits to. Actually, that should say in document the transparency measures undertaking, right? It's not document that you have an obligation. It's how you've sort of undertaken. Steps around transparency. Okay, next section is access. Maintain a process to effectively respond to external AI compliance inquiries, publicly identify means by which a third party can make an AI compliance inquiry. Here we have, instead of third party, we inserted interested parties. Actually, Brian and Jeff, do you recall, did we take that language from 420, that specific phrasing of interested parties? I think we did.
I don't recall.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure that aligns with the 42001.
Okay. All right. Make a compliance inquiry, and then we added this example. So that's that would be the reference for people to go back in and look at. Okay, and then the rationale. We took out the words open source. What was it? Did we take that out? Yeah, Jeff. Yeah, you took that out. Jeff, do you want to talk to that one?
To me, that just, unless I'm missing something, that was kind of just a legacy copy. You know, I think we probably grabbed some of this language when we were referencing the open source companion.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought that was just a mistake that didn't go corrected, but unless I'm missing something there.
No, I think I'm in agreement with you there.
Okay. All right. And then we get to effectively resourced. No edits to the section. Section 9, AI content review and approval. This whole section, you know, it looks like a kind of a placeholder. I just kind of added, excuse me, one sec. Sorry, just want to clear my throat. So I just added, you know, this, that there's a verification material and rationale that's needed there. I haven't thought that hard about this section, honestly. I probably need some help on that one. And then AI bill of materials is the next section. Is this the first place that we're defining AI bomb? I guess so. And then we added the AI bomb shall account for inbound materials from third-party suppliers. As I look at it now, I don't know if that's necessary. You know, a bill of materials should naturally include that as part of like its essence. There's probably some overlap with transparency on this point in the context of creation of a model. No edits to the verification materials. No edits to the rationale.
Dave, coming back to your point, is this the first time we've defined AI bill of materials? If it is in section 10, I think my gut feeling is we need to define it further up.
Mm-hmm.
But have we really not mentioned? Here we go. I think it's going to be here.
Yeah, there we go. All right, and then what I will do is I will fix section 10 so that we don't need to redefine it here. We just
Excellent.
okay. And then next section is governance. We have a comment that you captured from Prasad.
And Prasad, I think, I don't know if Prasad's on this call. I think he updated the wording here.
Yeah, I'm here.
Hi,
Yeah,
Prasad.
hey, Matthew. Yeah, so I just updated, just adding, you know, a few words around the RAI framework. So essentially, those organizations that do have the RAI framework established, it might be worthwhile to have a process around lifecycle management of all of these AI models and data sets. You know, because as the usage of these models proliferate across the organization, this could definitely be worthwhile to have a life cycle management process, and obviously, it's up to the organization how they want to implement it, but having some process that governs that, and at any given time to track the usage and make scope of impact assessments, this could be worthwhile.
Hey, Prasad, can you talk a little bit more about dynamic impact analysis?
Yeah, so dynamic impact analysis is, for example, let's say there is like in the middle of our the usage of these models, like, let's say the organization hears a potential model, or like maybe a specific training data set originating from a supplier needs to be looked at with a little bit more scrutiny, or something to do with, let's say there is some sort of a fallout that they need to go and look at all their products where these models or the data sets are essentially being used. This might be a way to do the analysis to ensure that all the various products or offers from that organization, how is the scope of impact looks like, right, from that particular supplier or a given model or a given data set, how this is going to impact across one or more products within the company. So that's what I was alluding to when it comes to the dynamic impact analysis. It's sort of similar to think about how, let's say, when Log4j incident that happened, we kind of get an idea of the affected versions and then go back and do a reverse lookup across the various product releases and get a sense of the overall scope of impact, and then obviously the appropriate patch that needs to be applied across the various impacted product releases. Something similar when it comes to the AI models and training data set.
Yeah, okay, thanks. I'm worried that phrasing might actually, get confused with like an impact assessment, which, it sounds like you don't mean. It's more like, understand it's more like understand the use case, impact of the data choices. Is that right?
Yeah. Understanding the scope of the usage of a given, or basically understanding the impact of a given model or a training data set in a dynamic manner, right? So this obviously needs to happen in a dynamic way. Like, there has to be some sort of an automation tool that should be able to provide this scope information in runtime, because sometimes the impact needs to be assessed much more quickly than so because sometimes this may take even months, but having automated system that will help us with this. So it's primarily from that aspect I was alluding to, but we can potentially reword it to this is a bit confusing.
Okay. All right. Can I propose some edits, to the first sentence as well, and then maybe you can react to that? Let me know if this is changing the intended meaning too much.
Yeah, sounds good. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, thanks. does that change the meaning of what you intend? And what do you think? And I'll provide some context for. I wanted to abstract from current regulations because that sounded legal, and just call out risks, because risk can be business risks, but can also be legal risks. And then and the rest of the other edit in that sentence is kind of just making that language work with the existing concepts. And then the next sentence, I was trying to capture, what you're trying to say, but without using the word, dynamic or impact, because I wasn't sure how those words in combination might be interpreted by people in the context of ongoing impact assessments that are sometimes legally required.
Yeah, I think ongoing analysis of their intended users. I think that seems to capture it. I think the more crux of this here is primarily around the having the process for life cycle management. I think that's already captured in the last sentence. So I think the changes looks okay to me. And also it does capture primarily the intended use analysis. I think that sort of definitely captures it. So I don't mind removing the dynamic or impact. Should be okay. Yeah, the key emphasis what I wanted to say was primarily around the life cycle management, because as the proliferation of these AI tools and obviously models goes high, I think it definitely makes sense to have organizations think about an approach to continuously upgrade, because these models and training data sets will have their own versions at some point. So how are we going to handle that, the usage of these models, like the newer versions of these models? Because as the models versions gets older, their operational risk is going to be much higher. So that, I think the essence of this is primarily to have a process framework to govern the usage, and then essentially manage the life cycle of the various AI models, from their starting, like when they're started to getting used in a company, and all the way till their decommissioning. So for a given version. So that's what we are trying to convey here. So I think that is captured in the final sentence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. That should be the gist of what we try to accomplish on this section.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then, okay. Other comments?
Oh, nothing from me.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Prasad.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. And then there's an edit at the bottom where I reference a section of the again, we go back to Annex B with focus on implementation. But there's a section there that is of interest. By the way, let me just ask a macro question. Because we're referencing 4201, so often, and I think it's natural because this is obviously we exist in the context of ISO, IEC. Do folks actually have copies of that? That standard. It's not like something that's just available on the internet, because ISO, IEC, they make money by selling copies. Actually, I don't know how they feel about OpenChain in the sense that we just provide free copies. But for the purchaser one, we don't own that one. But hopefully, people are able to access copies of it, or buy a copy of it. All right, thanks, Prasad. so verification materials, we got just 2 placeholders over there. So we have a few placeholders in various sections. Hey, would this be a good moment for us to, Cassandra, would this be a good moment for us to come back to you if you have anything on further on that item that we had a placeholder on, or should we take that up later?
Trying to unmute, sorry about that. I would like an opportunity to read it offline.
Okay.
That's
yeah,
okay.
that totally makes sense. Totally makes
Okay.
sense. Great.
Thanks.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we finished going through, the existing comments in the document, I think, at this point. We do have some sections still to work on, though. There's still a number of placeholders that we have kind of like, in the document. What I would suggest we do, Matthew, is maybe we invite people to run through and pay special attention to those placeholders and
Yep.
see if we can get those completed in our next session. Kind of like Cassandra has offered to go through the document. That would be awesome. And maybe if others are also willing to help with that, and then we can maybe get some language into verification materials and rationale for those sections. And I should also, suggest that just because we have sort of a framework organized around this, if there's some macro level questions and things that we should be revisiting, that's certainly open. And if you see an opportunity for us to combine sections in a logical way, then maybe that can be also considered as well. But I've mentioned before that there is a section, the AI content review and approval section, that I haven't myself thought enough about, and I'll commit to giving that additional thought before our next session as well.
That's great. So I think that's homework for everyone. If you have time and willing to do so, review the document, and as Dave said, focus on those placeholders, have a good review of the whole thing. Maybe we come back next month, which will be May, to kind of finish this off. And then I don't know if Shane is still around, but I think end of June is the next board meeting, and maybe we can come back to the board and say, I think we're there, and maybe we can share it with the board before that meeting.
It would be fantastic if we could get it to the board a little bit ahead of their meeting. The meeting is on the 25th of
25th.
June, I think. 26th, we'll have a small mini summit.
Okay.
So 26th will be the board and steering committee meeting, and that would be the ideal place if we could put it to them before that.
Sounds
Well,
great.
Go on.
Go ahead, Matthew.
I was just going to wrap up and say thank you to everyone. Dave, did you want to add anything apart from that?
I just want to call out Shane for staying awake.
Yeah, I was going to say.
You stayed the whole call. Sometimes.
What time is it,
we
Shane?
It's just 11 minutes past midnight, and I have a cheerful 5 hours before heading to the airport.
Nice.
Well, I think this is another reason to call time on this call, and we appreciate everyone's contributions.
Yeah.
Thank you
Thanks,
all.
everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good rest of your day.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.